It was Bernie Sanders' turn in the limelight at last night's Democratic debate on CBS. The 6 other candidates on stage attempted to stop the momentum of the Vermont senator, who is the new Democratic frontrunner following his runaway victory in the Nevada caucuses last weekend. His rivals attempted to lay out the case for placing themselves at the top of the ticket. They did so by attacking everything from Sanders' Keystone healthcare proposal to his comments on Cuba.
We are looking at a party that has decided that we're either going to support someone who's a democratic socialist or somebody who has a long history of being a Republican.
9 people shot dead by a white supremacist. Bernie voted 5 times against the Brady bill. I'm not saying he's responsible for the 9 deaths, but that man would not have been able to get that weapon with the waiting period had been what I suggest until you are cleared.
You want to have someone in charge of this ticket who wants to put forward $60 trillion in spending, 3 times the American economy. I don't think we do.
I am not looking forward to a scenario where it comes down to Donald Trump with his nostalgia for the social order of the 1950s and Bernie Sanders with the nostalgia for the revolutionary politics of the 1960s.
I have condemned authoritarianism, whether it is the people in Saudi Arabia that the United States government has loved for years, Cuba, Nicaragua. Authoritarianism of any stripe is bad. What every study out there, conservative or progressive, says Medicare for all will save money. Of the last 50 polls that have been done nationally, I beat Trump 47 of those 50 times.
But it's not entirely clear the attacks had the desired effect. In CBS News' post-debate poll, Sanders was the top pick of Democratic debate watchers when asked which candidate made the best case for beating Donald Trump. So let's bring in Anthony Salvanto, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Zach Montellaro, and Eugene Scott. Anthony is CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter. Zach is a campaign reporter for Politico. Eugene is a political reporter for The Washington Post. Welcome to all of you. Anthony, let me start with you. Walk us through some of the more significant findings of your post-debate poll.
Well, on the particular point you raised in the intro, where folks were going after Bernie Sanders about his past statements on communist or authoritarian regimes, more people in the debate said that he did a good job of explaining those positions than said he did a bad job. And that kind of dovetails with that other larger point that they thought that he was the most impressive, although that was just by a margin over Joe Biden, who was also then in second, if you will, for being considered the most impressive.
A close second. Elizabeth Warren also did well there. Pete Buttigieg. Amy Klobuchar. Then there was a little bit of a fall off there for Bloomberg and Steyer.
And a fall off for Bloomberg and for Steyer. And that's the second debate where we've measured some sort of sentiment saying that Mike Bloomberg maybe didn't live up to expectations for his folks. But look, the other part of this, too, is that when we asked people if they got clarity in this campaign out of the debate, more people said that they had. And
so that's useful. That's useful information for voters.
That is useful.
I want to stick with Mike Bloomberg, though. Caitlin, the numbers for Michael Bloomberg don't appear particularly strong, as Anthony and I were just discussing. He was second to last in impressing debate watchers. So is his campaign happy with how things went last night?
Well, the Bloomberg campaign had a pretty disastrous debate performance last week and was looking for this week to kind of make a comeback and to really focus on Bernie Sanders and try to make this kind of a one-on-one matchup with him. If that was the strategy, I don't think they were successful in that, because Michael Bloomberg is still the target of attacks from his rivals, especially from Elizabeth Warren, who has been kind of using Bloomberg as a stand-in for Donald Trump on the debate stage, really going after him hard. For Michael Bloomberg, he is at a critical time in his campaign. We're less than a week away from Super Tuesday, and that's where he is competing. Remember, he's not on the ballot here in South Carolina. He hasn't been competing in the 3 earlier contests. He has put all of his money on Super Tuesday states, trying to gain traction there. It's important to note that voters in those states are already voting in Texas and California. So does this debate change the trajectory for anybody if voters have already already made up their minds. But I think for Michael Bloomberg, if he was looking for a comeback last night, I don't think you can characterize it as one.
Right. Yeah, I guess Super Tuesday is where we'll be able to measure the full impact of the Bloomberg campaign. Eugene, I want to ask you, based on these numbers, these polling numbers, what do you see as the implications of last night's debate on Saturday's primary, as well as looking ahead to Super Tuesday?
Well, it's difficult to determine whether or not people voting on Saturday paid that much attention to last night's debate. I think we in the political world like to think that more people are tuned in than actually are sometimes. But for those who were still undecided, and that is a sizable percentage of those in South Carolina, last night was an opportunity, I believe, for most candidates to get their ideas out there in ways that they had not in the past. And I think some candidates, people like Biden, people like Warren and Sanders, did a pretty effective job of that. And I think your own polling suggests that, leaving voters with more clarity on some of the more problematic areas from these candidates' stances and comments, and making it clear to voters where they stand on issues that perhaps could be trouble for them in the future.
So, Zach, I want to turn to the Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden back and forth. They continued to go after each other today. First in South Carolina, Sanders saying Biden's record is not going to bring people into the political process to beat Trump. Not long after that, NBC puts out a clip of Biden taking essentially the opposite stance. Let's listen.
Americans aren't looking for revolution. They're looking for progress. They're looking for, tell me how you're going to help me with my health care. Tell you to make me safer. Tell you how we're going to do it.
But, Mr. Vice President, some seem keen on a revolution.
Well, some do, but look at the numbers. We always talk about this great increase in participation. He's nowhere near, he's not going to come anywhere near generating the kind of participation of young folks that Barack did in 2008. There's no evidence of that yet. There's a lot of young people out there who are supportive of a more, I won't say rational, a more practical path to get things done.
So what does that tell you about how Biden sees Sanders, particularly as a threat to him in South Carolina?
Yeah, so look at it in the context of South Carolina. You know, Biden needs to win South Carolina. He has not won a primary this year or in any of the other previous presidential runs. So he needs to win in South Carolina to even have some sort of argument that he has any level of coalition behind him. So look at this as a sign that Sanders is kind of catching up on Biden in the state. You know, South Carolina right now is basically a three-person dance. It's Biden, Sanders, and Tom Steyer. And, you know, you'll be hard-pressed to find a Sanders aide who will say that Sanders could win the state. But he very much could. And even a small margin of victory by Biden in that state, let alone a Sanders win, would, you know, really hurt Biden's case of electability more so than even his blowout losses in Nevada and his losses in Iowa and New Hampshire. So kind of look at that. Biden sees Sanders on his coattails in South Carolina, and Biden is trying to keep him at bay.
All right, so Caitlin, I want to go back to you because you are at the Elizabeth Warren rally in Charleston. We saw the Massachusetts senator launch some attacks at Bernie Sanders, but they certainly weren't as strong as the ones she launched against Bloomberg. What does that tell you about how she sees her path to victory?
I think it tells you that she still has a design on getting some Bernie Sanders supporters. Remember, as we've seen in polls, he's continued to gain traction among more liberal members of the party, voters that she might be competing for. So she doesn't want to entirely attack him. That's why she has drawn contrasts on their records, on their policy positions, and saying that she would be, in her view, a better president than Bernie. But she really reserved the attacks for Michael Bloomberg because he really kind of fits neatly into her campaign pitch, this anti-corruption kind of pitch that she's been talking about over the course of her campaign. This also comes as she's really underperformed in a lot of key contests. She had a robust ground operation in Iowa and in New Hampshire that didn't quite deliver her the results that she wanted. She's been looking to Super Tuesday states to kind of make her comeback. She's campaigning here tonight in Charleston, actually right behind me. She'll be appearing with the musician John Legend, and she's trying to gain momentum after these debates, which she's had success at in terms of money. In the last debate, she was able to raise a lot of money afterwards to keep her campaign kind of afloat. But I asked her last night, actually, you know, Super Tuesday is just less than a week away, and her home state of Massachusetts will be holding a contest on that day. I asked her if she could guarantee a win there. She said that she's doing well, that she wants to. She wouldn't quite answer the question there, but that's also a liability for her as she's kind of calculating how to move forward. But the campaign on her part certainly sees last night as a success and continues to see success in going after Michael Bloomberg.
Right, and she did well in the poll in terms of, impressing voters last night after the debate. But Zach, I want to go back to you. You also noted this morning Biden spent time going after Tom Steyer last night. And at first glance, that might seem, an unusual focus for the former vice president until you take a closer look at the South Carolina polling. Is that right?
Yeah, Steyer has been functionally a non-factor, certainly in Iowa and New Hampshire. National polls, he got a little bit of support in Nevada, but where Tom Steyer has kind of focused his campaign has been South Carolina. He spent tens of millions of dollars on television ads. He's had the biggest field staff in the state. And as a result of that, as a result of the time he's put in as well, he's actually a strong candidate in the state. We've had very limited public polling out of there, unfortunately, but what we have seen, especially the CBS poll, has had Steyer in third place in South Carolina, eating into Joe Biden's margin. Joe Biden had a majority of voters, a majority of African-American voters in that state, when the race started, and now Tom Steyer is eating away at that. So what Biden wants to do is kind of knock Steyer down a peg, kind of knock him down to where he is nationally, which is basically the bottom of the list, to try to win back some of those voters. Steyer has underperformed some polling that we saw in Nevada, that his support has been not as sticky as others. So Biden is hoping to win back people who like Tom Steyer but would vote for Biden instead.
Yeah, that's not insignificant progress Tom Steyer has made there. All right, so Eugene, I want to turn to you. Your new article looks at what young South Carolina Democrats want the most. What did you learn?
Well, when I was in Charleston speaking with young voters, they expressed deep concern about the direction of the country and more than anything else, want a leader who's going to pivot away from Trump's vision of a great America. Many of them were undecided, like most, or not most, but a significant percentage of South Carolina voters. But those who had made their minds up were leaning towards Sanders. And that's because they liked his message of revamping things when it comes to the economics of America, specifically related to the cost of higher education, the income inequality between people of color and white Americans, issues related to raising the minimum wage federally and statewide, and also making more housing affordable. And so economics, more than anything, were shaping the perspectives of young voters. And because of that, they were looking for a more progressive option than one that's more moderate.
So interesting, Anthony. I want to turn to you on that note because, of course, we know President Trump is running on the strength of the economy. But one of the statements that Sanders got sort of a big applause from the audience last night was like, yeah, it's a great economy if you're a billionaire. And clearly, based on what Eugene said, there are a lot of young people feel nervous about the economy or that they're not sharing in the wealth of the economy. So does the impact of these young South Carolinian voters have the potential to really change the primary?
Well, for Bernie Sanders, that's a core part of his support. It's been that way in all the states. The larger context out of that is you're correct. For a lot of young people, in particular for a lot of young independents and Democrats, they feel that the economy simply does not work. And it doesn't matter what the GDP is, and it doesn't matter what the stock market is. They don't see the same opportunities that they feel that previous generations have had. So in that regard, this idea of changing the entire system appears to have a degree of appeal.
Right.
Now, having said that, the electorate in South Carolina, of course, is not just young people. It's very diverse. In fact, it's going to be one of the most diverse that we've seen so far. And it's going to be majority African American. Folks who've been watching CBSN in our coverage, we've definitely addressed that. But it's so important. And right now, you see Joe Biden with a marginal lead, a bit of a lead among African Americans. So that's really important. And then the last thing that I would emphasize for everybody out there is, step back from the argument over who wins South Carolina and look at who gets delegates. One of the things, even if Bernie Sanders doesn't actually win the state, and he's trailing a bit in the polls, if he gets over 15%, if he does well in districts, he'll pick up delegates out of South Carolina and continue to be the delegate leader heading into Super Tuesday. That's the math that matters.
So the math, it's all about the delegate math right now.
It is. Everybody
forward.
I know gets, I'm going to say that a lot over the next few months, but it happens to be true.
Right. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So, Caitlin, I want to ask you about Nancy Pelosi's comments saying that she is comfortable with Bernie Sanders as a potential nominee. This, of course, comes after several House Democrats expressed some concern about Sanders, even asking for a briefing on their role as superdelegates. So do we have any idea why some in the Democratic establishment are okay with a potential Sanders nomination, while others don't seem to be quite so comfortable with it?
Well, I think that speaks to the way in which they kind of want to see how this plays out before rendering a judgment. Remember, she has a big caucus to keep together through the election, but she has to be looking at some of these districts that flipped from Republican to Democrat in 2018 after those midterm elections in reaction to Donald Trump. You've seen several of those new Democrats support Joe Biden, a point that he made last night. And that's something we've been hearing from the Biden campaign, that he's someone who many of these more moderate Democrats or Democrats from swing districts would be comfortable with having at the top of the ticket. You also heard some candidates last night express concern about Bernie Sanders at the top of the ticket. We talked to Amy Klobuchar about that last night after the debate, and she said she was really concerned about Bernie Sanders and the impact he could have on down ballot races in states like hers, in Minnesota and elsewhere. He has also taken incoming fire from two congresswomen in South Florida in key swing districts down there, again, districts that flipped from Republican to Democrat, for his comments about Fidel Castro in that 60 Minutes interview. So this is something that his campaign is going to be grappling with. But I am interested to see, kind of as we go through, and if Bernie Sanders continues to have momentum, continues to capture delegates, whether we might see that change, whether we might start to see people kind of come around to the idea of his candidacy. And a couple of Democratic strategists that I've been talking to, what they're looking for in the next couple of weeks for the Bernie Sanders campaign is the kind of an overture to kind of show how he would work with all kinds of Democrats. Right now, we saw Bernie Sanders in the debate last night not apologizing for any stances, getting himself back on message, and that's been a really, key component of his campaign, and a successful one that he doesn't plan to stop anytime soon.
One of the things that he keeps repeating is that my ideas are not as radical as everybody thinks they are. Yeah. Anthony, does that bear out in the polling, this idea that perception may not be exactly what, as in his platform?
Look, all of us, whether pundits and pollsters, et cetera, often tend to put shorthand labels on things, right? Yeah. But we don't always know that they mean the same thing to everyone. And the label of socialism is one that we continue to explore. To younger people, it can mean and does mean equality of services, everybody getting health care, particularly in the case of support for Bernie Sanders. But to other people, and Caitlin sort of alluded to this, for folks of an older generation.
Nationalizing businesses, having taxes triple. People are not clear on, the devil's in the details.
If you've lived through the Cold War, it means something very different, et cetera. So,
Anthony Salvanto, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Zach Montellaro, Eugene Scott, thanks to all of you. We really appreciate it.